The first thing you need to understand is that clean water is a magic trick. You turn a handle and it appears, and you never once think about the distance it traveled, the chemistry that made it safe, the pressure that pushed it uphill to your bathroom on the 3rd floor. You flush a toilet and the evidence of your life disappears. You fill a glass and drink something that, 12 hours ago, was raw influent thick enough to stand a pencil in. That transformation is not natural. It is engineered. It requires electricity, chlorine, monitoring, adjustment, and at least 4 people who know what they're doing at any given hour. My name is Warren Kessler. For 11 years, I managed the Ocoee River Water Treatment Facility, which served the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and most of unincorporated Hamilton County. On the night of January 14th, I was the last qualified operator inside the plant. I was the one who shut it down. And I need you to understand before you judge that what "shut it down" means in practice. It means I turned off the pumps that pressurized 340 miles of distribution main. It means I closed the intake valves on a system that delivered 58 million gallons per day to approximately 180,000 service connections. It means I took water away from hospitals, dialysis centers, apartment buildings with elderly residents who couldn't walk to a creek. I took it away from fire hydrants. I took it away from restaurants still open that night trying to feed people. I took it away from a children's shelter on McCallie Avenue that I drove past every morning for a decade. I did all of this at 10:47 p.m., roughly 4 hours before the first confirmed reanimation event in our county, because I'd already done the math. And the math was not complicated. Here is what I knew by 9 p.m. that night. Nashville had gone dark. Knoxville's hospitals were issuing overflow protocols for bite trauma. The CDC had released a statement at 6:15 p.m. that used the word "unprecedented" 4 times and the word "we're dead" 0 times, which told me everything. Our plant sits on the south bank of the Ocoee, about 6 miles upstream of the Chickamauga Dam. We draw raw water from a protected intake off the Tennessee River, run it through flocculation, sedimentation, dual media filtration, chlorine disinfection, and fluoridation. The finished water enters a clear well, then gets pumped into the distribution system at roughly 65 pounds per square inch. From the clear well to the farthest service connection in the network, transit time is about 19 hours. At 9 p.m., I was watching the news in the control room with Darnell Okafor, my night shift lead, and Megan Royce, our newest operator, 6 months on the job. Darnell had his phone tilted so Megan couldn't see it. I could. The video was from Vanderbilt Medical Center hallway footage. Shaky, someone screaming off frame, and then a man in a hospital gown standing up from a gurney, with the posture of a person whose brain had forgotten how knees work. Darnell locked his phone and set it face down. "How long?" he said, not as a question. "Before what?" "Before we can't staff this place." I didn't answer him directly. I pulled up our SCADA system and checked the clear well level. 14.2 million gallons, about 8 hours of demand at average winter rates. I checked the chlorine residual at the first monitoring station downstream. 1.8 parts per million, within range. Then I checked something I'd never had operational reason to check before. The inventory report on our sodium hypochlorite bulk tank. 12,000 gallons. Enough for 18 days of treatment at current dose rates. None of that was the problem. "Darnell," I said, "what happens when the power goes out?" He didn't hesitate. "Backup generators, 48 hours of diesel, maybe 60 if we cut non-essential. And after 60, we call the county. And when the county doesn't answer," He was quiet for a long moment. Megan looked between us. She was 24, bright, still young enough to assume systems would hold because she'd never seen one fail. Then the pumps stop, Darnell said. Pressure drops to zero. Every main in the network goes static. And what happens to static water in 340 miles of pipe that hasn't been flushed? He sat back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands, and I knew he understood, because Darnell had been doing this almost as long as I had. And he knew the answer was not theoretical. When pressure drops, the distribution system doesn't just stop delivering water. It becomes a reservoir. A sealed, dark, unmonitored reservoir that stretches under every street in the city, connected to every building, touching every faucet. And without positive pressure, the system doesn't push outward. It sucks inward. Every cracked joint, every cross-connection, every point where a sewer line runs 6 inches from a water main, the gradient reverses. Groundwater migrates in. Contaminants migrate in. And no one is monitoring it because the telemetry runs on the same power grid that just died. People will turn their taps. Water will come out. It will look the same. They will drink it. By 10 p.m., the news had fractured into 3 separate realities depending on which channel you watched. The local NBC affiliate was running a crawl about civil disturbance advisories for Nashville, Knoxville, and Memphis. Fox was showing helicopter footage of I-24 gridlocked westbound out of Murfreesboro with a sound cut. CNN had a retired Army colonel explaining that National Guard deployment in 3 states was precautionary. I wasn't watching anymore. I was in my office doing arithmetic on the back of a chemical delivery receipt. The math was this. Our clear well held enough treated water to supply the city for roughly 8 hours without the plant running at all. If I kept the plant operating and the grid held, we'd continue producing finished water indefinitely, but indefinitely assumed chlorine deliveries, chemical supply chains, and at least 3 trained operators per shift to manage coagulant dosing, pH adjustment, and filter backwash cycles. Darnell and Megan were here. Our day shift operators were Terrence Buell and Angie Soto, neither of whom had answered their phones in 2 hours. I had one backup operator on our call-out list, a guy named Phil Fenton, who lived in Red Bank. I called Phil. His wife answered, said he'd driven to Atlanta to get her mother. She was crying. I didn't ask why. So the real math was 3 operators, including me. 3 people to run a plant that required a minimum of 2 on duty at all times. For how long? The chemical deliveries weren't coming. The grid was going to fail not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when it failed, the system I'd spent my career maintaining would become the most efficient contamination delivery network in the county. I'd designed our emergency protocols myself. They covered equipment failure, chemical spills, main breaks, source water contamination events, even extended power outages up to 5 days. None of them covered, the operators are dead and no replacement is coming. None of them covered, the city is emptying, and the people who remain will drink anything that comes from a faucet because they still trust the system. That trust was the thing that would kill them. I went back to the control room and told Darnell and Megan what I intended to do. I was going to shut down the high-service pumps, close the clear well discharge valves, and drain the system pressure to 0. Then I was going to open every blow-off valve I could reach on the trunk mains within a 2-mile radius of the plant to empty the nearest sections of pipe entirely. Megan stared at me. "You want to take the water away." "I want to take it away while people can still find alternatives. Wells, creeks, rainwater, anything they can see with their own eyes and boil themselves." "You'll kill people, dialysis patients, People on oxygen concentrators that need humidification. The hospital's backup supply only lasts 12 hours, I know. I helped them size the cistern. Then you know what you're doing. I know what happens if I don't. 2 weeks from now, when the power's been out for 10 days and the residual chlorine has decayed to zero, and bacteroides and coliforms have colonized every branch main in the system, some mother is going to fill a bottle from her kitchen sink and give it to her baby because the water looks fine. It looks fine, Megan. It always looks fine. That's the trick. Darnell said nothing. He was staring at the SCADA screen, watching the real-time pressure readings across the network. Those calm green numbers that meant 180,000 connections were receiving water right now, this second. If you're wrong about this, Megan said, if this passes, then I'll be the man who shut off water to a city for no reason. I can live with that. And if you're right. I didn't answer that, because she already knew. If I was right, the people who died of thirst in the next 72 hours were people I killed by deliberate action. And the people who would have died in the next 3 weeks from waterborne disease were people I saved by that same action. And there was no version of events where both numbers were zero. Darnell stood up and walked to the pump control panel. He looked at me over his shoulder. You sure? I'm sure. He initiated the shutdown sequence. Pump 1 tripped first. The vibration that had been humming through the building's concrete slab for as long as I'd worked there went quiet in my feet before I heard the motor spin down. Then pump 2. Then the booster. The SCADA screen began to change. Pressure readings at the near-field monitoring stations started dropping within minutes. The far-field stations would take hours. Megan sat down on the floor with her back against the wall and pressed her palms flat against the concrete as if she were feeling for a heartbeat that had just stopped. Okay, she said. So what do we do now? We go tell people what I did and why. We did not get far. The plant sits at the end of an access road off Highway 30, fenced and gated. The kind of facility you drive past 10,000 times without ever registering it exists. The gate has a keypad and a mechanical arm. I drove my truck through it at 11:20 p.m. with Darnell in the passenger seat and Megan following in her Honda. We had printed 40 copies of a one-page notice I'd typed on the plant's ancient laser printer. The notice explained that water service had been suspended for public safety, that tap water in homes and businesses should not be consumed, and that residents should seek natural water sources and boil all water for a minimum of 5 minutes before drinking. I'd included the GPS coordinates of 3 public boat ramps on the Tennessee River where people could access surface water. We made it to the first intersection on Highway 30 before we saw them. 3 figures on the shoulder, moving wrong. I'd watched enough of the footage on Darnell's phone to recognize the gait, not limping, not staggering, but walking with a mechanical persistence that had no apparent destination. The headlights caught the closest one full in the face. A woman, maybe 50, wearing a Walmart vest. Her jaw was dislocated and hanging at an angle that would have produced screaming in a living person. She turned toward the truck without urgency, the way a weather vane turns toward wind. I stopped the truck. Darnell grabbed the dashboard. Go, he said. We need to post these notices. Warren, go. I looked in the rear view. Megan's headlights were right behind me. She'd seen them too. Her high beams clicked on, and the scene bloomed into ugly clarity. More of them, emerging from the tree line on the south side of the road. 5 or 6, moving toward the sound of our engines with that same indifferent convergence. I drove. We all drove. I turned south toward the residential neighborhoods off Shallowford Road, where the density of service connections was highest, where the most people would wake up tomorrow and try their taps. But the streets were already wrong. Porch lights on with front doors open, cars parked at angles and driveways as if the drivers had exited in motion. A dog standing in the middle of an intersection, barking at nothing, then at us, then running. We stopped at a gas station on the corner of Shallowford and Gun Barrel. The lights were on inside. A man was behind the counter, alive. He watched us pull in, and his hand went below the register. Darnell got out with his hands visible and a stack of notices. "Sir, my name is Darnell Okafor. I'm with the city water treatment plant. The water is off. Don't drink from the tap. Don't let anyone drink from the tap." The man behind the counter didn't lower his hand. "The water's been off for 20 minutes. My toilet stopped filling. What's going on?" "We shut it down, deliberately. It won't be safe once the pressure drops. Please." Darnell held out a notice. "Put this in your window." The man took the paper, read the first 2 lines, and looked up at us. "You shut the water off, tonight, with whatever's happening out there." "Yes, sir." "Are you out of your mind?" I heard Megan honk twice from the parking lot. I looked and saw why. 2 of them had followed us from the highway. They were in the road now, maybe 200 yards back, walking toward the gas station's light. "We have to go," I said. The man followed my gaze, saw the shapes, and ducked below the counter entirely. When he came back up, he was holding a shotgun, and his face had changed into something I recognized, not fear exactly, but the expression of a person recalculating the size of the world. "Go," he said. "I'll put the paper up." We posted 11 notices that night. We got them into the windows of 2 gas stations, a Walgreens, a fire station that was empty, and taped them to the doors of an elementary school, a church, and 5 houses that still had lights on. We knocked. Some people answered. Most didn't. The ones who answered reacted in a range from confusion to fury. And every single one of them asked the same question. "Why would you do this now?" I didn't have an answer that fit the moment. The moment was blood and noise and the dead walking in the road. The math that justified my decision operated on a time scale of weeks. And weeks were incomprehensible to people watching their neighbors die tonight. By 1 a.m., we were back at the plant with the gate locked behind us. Darnell went to the roof to watch the access road. Megan sat at the SCADA console monitoring pressure readings that were still falling across the network, a slow exhalation, like the city breathing out. I sat in my office and stared at the 29 notices we hadn't posted. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Dr. Ahmad Erlanger Regional, who authorized water shutdown. We have 340 patients. Call immediately." I turned my phone off and put it in my desk drawer. I did not sleep. I sat in the control room watching the numbers. Pressure at Station 12, the high point in the system, up on Missionary Ridge, hit 0 at 3:41 a.m. Pressure at Station 3, downtown, near the hospital, held at 8 ps1 until 4:15 a.m., sustained by residual head from the Stringer's Ridge tank, which I hadn't been able to drain remotely. Then it dropped to 4, then 2. Then the telemetry connection failed entirely, which meant the power had gone out at the RTU site, which meant the grid was starting to shed load. By dawn, the system was a corpse. 340 miles of pipe full of standing water, no pressure, no circulation, no residual disinfectant. A network of capillaries with no heart. I pulled up the GIS map of our distribution system on the office computer. the one that still ran on our generator. I'd stared at that map every working day for 11 years. The mains were blue. The service laterals were green. The valves were red dots. I knew the layout the way a surgeon knows vasculature. And now I was looking at it the way a coroner does. The first cross-contamination would already be happening, wherever a water main ran near a sewer line, and in Chattanooga's older infrastructure, that was hundreds of locations. The loss of positive pressure meant the gradient had reversed. Sewage doesn't need a pump. It follows gravity and pressure differential. With 0 PS1 in the water main and slight positive pressure in the sewer from ongoing flow and gas buildup, the migration was physics, not probability. Fecal coliform, E. coli, Cryptosporidium, Giardia. And whatever new pathogen was in the blood of the recently dead, if it was in the sewage, and it would be, because people who were bitten went home, people who died bled, and blood goes down drains that was in the pipe network too. Megan came in at 6 a.m. with instant coffee made from bottled water we kept in the break room. Her eyes were swollen. She set a mug in front of me and sat in the chair across the desk. Darnell counted 19 on the access road overnight. They don't come past the gate. They just walk along the fence. The fence is chain link and razor wire. It won't stop them if they push. He says they don't push. They follow the fence line and then walk away. Okay? Warren, what's the plan? The plan? I had a legal pad in front of me with 2 columns. The left column was labeled plant. The right column was labeled city. Under plant I had written generator fuel, 6 days. Chemicals, 18 days of treatment capacity. Clearwell, 14.2 million gallons treated water, sealed. Food, vending machines, staff fridge, 4 to 5 days for 3 people. Under city I had written population unknown remaining, awareness of contamination risk negligible, alternative water sources river, creeks, residential wells, few. Boil water capacity depends on gas/fuel. Time until pipe network becomes actively lethal, 7 to 11 days. That last number was the one that kept me in my chair. I'd calculated it based on chlorine decay curves in static distribution systems. The residual disinfectant I'd been maintaining at 1.8 parts per million would degrade at roughly 0.15 parts per million per day in the absence of circulation. Faster in warmer branch lines, slower in the larger mains. Below 0.2 parts per million, bacterial regrowth begins. Below detectable levels, the water in the pipes would be indistinguishable from untreated surface water, except it would be invisible delivered through faucets people had trusted their entire lives. The plan, I said, is that we have a clear well full of safe water and no way to deliver it. The pumps are right there, and the distribution system is already contaminated. If I pressurize it now, I push treated water into a network that sucked in sewage and groundwater for 8 hours. I'd be diluting the contamination, not eliminating it. Every gallon I push in mixes with what's already migrated. The only way to make the system safe again is to flush every main, test every branch, and superchlorinate the entire network. That takes 2 weeks with full crew and equipment, which we don't have, which does not exist anymore. She drank her coffee in silence. Then, so we have 14 million gallons of clean water sitting in a concrete tank 50 feet from us, and we can't give it to anyone through the system it was built for. We can give it to them here, at the plant, if they come to us. How would they know to come? We'd have to tell them. We posted 11 notices, Warren, in a city of 180,000. I know. The generator hummed outside the window. The clear well was 40 feet below us, buried, sealed, a concrete cathedral full of water so clean You could perform surgery with it. And it was useless to every person in the city except the three of us, sitting on top of it. At 8 a.m., Darnell came down from the roof and said the access road was clear. We had a decision to make. The plant had two vehicles, my F-150 and a utility van with the plant's logo on the side. A blue water drop with Hamilton County Water Quality stenciled beneath it. The van was loaded with sampling equipment, traffic cones, and 50 feet of lay-flat hose. Darnell proposed we take the van back into the neighborhoods, this time with the PA speaker that the fire station had left mounted on a traffic-controlled trailer in our back lot. We'd drive the streets announcing the boil water advisory and directing people to the plant for clean water. "We don't have containers," Megan said. "People will come with what? Mixing bowls? Trash bags?" "They'll figure it out. People always figure out containers." "How do we dispense it? The Clearwell doesn't have a garden hose bib." She was right. The Clearwell discharge is a 36-inch main that feeds the high-service pump suction. The only way to draw water from it without the pumps running was through a 4-inch sample line in the mechanical gallery, which I could valve open manually. The flow rate would be roughly 50 gallons per minute through that line. If 100 people showed up with 5-gallon buckets, we'd need over an hour just to fill their containers. If 1,000 showed up, we'd need all day. But the alternative was letting 14.2 million gallons of treated water sit in a tank until the generator ran out and the building went dark. "Darnell takes the van," I said. "PA speaker. Same route as last night, but expands south to Brainerd and east to the Ridge. Tell people, water plant, Highway 30. Bring containers, daylight hours only. Megan stays here and sets up the sample line with a manifold. I'll rig a gravity feed from the Clearwell access hatch if the sample valve can't keep up." "And the ones on the road?" Darnell asked. "They're not gone. They're just not here right now. The plant has a security fence, 2 gates, and the access road is a quarter-mile choke point. If they come, we close the gate and wait." "You're talking about inviting the public to a location that's surrounded by—" "I'm talking about giving people water, Darnell. Today. While we still can." He held my eyes for 3 seconds, then picked up the van keys from the hook by the door. "I'm taking the sampling kit's megaphone as backup. And I'm not stopping the van for anyone who's not standing upright on 2 functioning legs." "Agreed." He left at 8:30. Megan and I went to the mechanical gallery, a concrete room below grade that smelled of chlorine and wet metal, where the 4-inch sample line emerged from the Clearwell wall. I found a ball valve in our spare parts cage and a 2-inch reducer that would let us connect a garden hose. The hose would be slow, maybe 10 gallons per minute, but it would work, and people could understand a garden hose. It was familiar. It was not threatening. It didn't require explanation. In a world that had stopped making sense overnight, a garden hose running clean water was a sentence in a language people still spoke. We had the line running by 10 a.m. Clear water, cold from the underground tank, 1.6 parts per million chlorine residual per the test strip Megan ran. We filled 2 5-gallon sample jugs from the supply closet and drank from one ourselves. It tasted the way it always tasted, like nothing, which is what clean water is supposed to taste like. The absence of taste. The absence of death. The most important nothing in the world. Darnell came back at 11:45. He covered about 8 square miles. He looked older than he had that morning. "I found people," he said. "Lots of them, clustered, mostly in the big apartment complexes off Brainerd Road. Some had already tried the taps and got nothing. A few got a trickle of brown. One woman was filling pots from her swimming pool. She had 3 kids under 6. Did you tell them to come here?" I told everyone I saw. But Warren, the roads are bad. There's wrecks on Shallowford. The on-ramp to 75 is a parking lot of abandoned cars. People on foot can probably make it from as far as Brainerd, maybe 3 miles. Anyone farther than that. He trailed off. How many infected? I saw 12, 13, scattered. Not grouped up, not fast, just around. Like they're part of the landscape now. The first people arrived at the plant gate at 1:15 p.m. A man and a woman, both in their 30s, carrying a plastic storage bin between them. They stood at the gate and stared at the chain link like they expected a receptionist. Megan walked out and opened the gate. "Do you have water?" the man asked. His voice cracked on the second word. "We have water." By 3 p.m., there were 41 people inside our fence. By sundown, there were 93. The second night was when I learned the difference between a water plant and a shelter. A water plant has chemical storage, mechanical systems, a control room, a break room, restrooms, and a conference room that no one had used for anything except vendor lunches in the 11 years I'd worked there. It does not have beds, blankets, infant formula, first aid supplies beyond a wall-mounted kit, or any space designed for human habitation. The treatment building is 2 stories of concrete and steel designed to house equipment, not people. 93 people in that space is not a crowd. It's a compression event. They came with whatever they'd been carrying when they heard Darnell's announcement: backpacks, garbage bags of clothes, pillows, loose handfuls of canned goods. One family of 5 arrived with a shopping cart full of bottled water, which was the most bitterly ironic thing I'd ever witnessed, given that they were standing next to 14 million gallons of the same product. A woman named Clarice, maybe 65, arrived carrying nothing but a Bible and a cat in a pillowcase. The cat was calm. Clarice was not. They spread across the ground floor of the treatment building and the covered area between the chemical storage shed and the generator pad. Families claimed corners, singles drifted to the edges. I watched the geometry of crisis seating arrange itself with the same logic as a middle school cafeteria. Clusters of familiarity surrounded by buffers of empty space. By 8 p.m., a man I hadn't spoken to yet walked up to me in the control room. He was tall, sunburned, wearing a Hamilton County Schools polo shirt. "You the one in charge?" "I'm the plant manager." "I'm Ray Toombs. I taught 8th grade science at East Ridge Middle until 4 hours ago. 3 of my students are here without parents. 1 is 12, 2 are 10. Are they hurt?" "No. They're sitting behind the generator housing because it's warm. They're sitting there because they walked here from the Hickory Valley Apartments after watching their building manager get pulled apart in the parking lot. And one of them heard your guy on the loudspeaker and told the other 2. They are 10 and 12 years old, and they walked here alone. I didn't know what he wanted from me. I didn't know what I could give him. "What do you need?" I said. "I need you to understand that this is not a water plant anymore. You've got children here. You've got a diabetic man by the front entrance who needs refrigerated insulin and a power source. You've got a woman in the break room who is 37 weeks pregnant. This is a shelter now, and it needs someone who thinks like a shelter, not someone who thinks in gallons per minute." He was right, and the fact that he was right did not change the fact that the only thing keeping any of them alive was the gallons per minute. "Mr. Toombs, I hear you. But the reason these people are here is the water. If I stop managing the water to manage the people lose the reason they came. Then someone else manages the people, and you keep doing what you're doing. But someone has to. Tonight." This was how Ray Toombs became the thing I didn't know I needed. Not a second in command, not a deputy, but a parallel authority operating on a different axis entirely. I dealt in infrastructure. He dealt in bodies. We overlapped at the point where bodies needed infrastructure. But the rest of his domain, the emotional triage, the space allocation, the disputes, the fear was territory I was not just unqualified for, but congenitally incapable of navigating. I thought in systems. Ray thought in faces. He organized the ground floor that night. Families with children closest to the restrooms. The pregnant woman, her name was Gina, got the conference room and a folding cot that someone had brought. Clarice and her cat got the break room. The 3 unaccompanied kids got the floor of Ray's claimed corner in the hallway outside my office, where he sat against the wall with his legs stretched across the corridor like a human gate, awake, watching. I stayed in the control room, monitoring the generator fuel gauge and listening to the building breathe with 93 sets of lungs. At 2 a.m., someone knocked on the gate. Darnell was on watch. He radioed me. 12 more, 2 vehicles. They've got a hand-painted sign on the car that says water plant with an arrow. Someone copied our notice. I said, let them in. We let them in. At 4 a.m., more knocking. 7 on foot, flashlights. One of them was bleeding from a bite on the forearm. Darnell radioed again. His voice was different this time. Warren, one of them's bit. The man's name was Pete Garza. He was 44, a parts counter clerk at an auto supply store on Ringgold Road. The bite was on his left forearm, a crescent of punctures through the sleeve of a flannel jacket, swollen and dark at the margins. He held his arm against his chest like it was something he was returning to a store. I met them at the gate with Darnell and a flashlight. The 6 others with Pete were strangers to him. People who'd been walking the same road and converged. A young couple, a man in his 70s with a cane, 2 women who might have been mother and daughter. They all stood behind Pete and looked at us the way you look at a bouncer. When were you bitten? I asked. 3 hours ago, maybe 4. I was getting gas at the Murphy station on 153. One of them came around the pump island. He said it with the flatness of someone describing a fender bender. Any symptoms? Fever, confusion, numbness in the limb? It hurts like hell. That's about it. I didn't know the incubation timeline. No one did, not with certainty. The news had talked about rapid onset without defining the term. The CDC statement had mentioned hours to days. I'd seen Darnell's hallway video, the man on the gurney reanimating. But I didn't know how long that man had been dead, or bitten, or whatever the sequence was. I was a water treatment engineer. My expertise ended at the property line of microbiology. What I knew about this pathogen was what I knew about any waterborne contaminant. It was in the system now. And the question was exposure pathway and dose response. What I did not know was whether to let Pete Garza through my gate. The 6 people behind him were watching me. The 70-year-old man with the cane said, "Son, we've been walking for 2 hours. We need water and a place to sit down. You can all come in. I need to figure out a protocol for him." "A protocol?" Pete said. "I'm not a sample, man. I'm a person." Megan appeared at my shoulder. She'd heard the radio. She looked at Pete's arm and said, "I can clean and wrap that. We've got a first aid kit, but we don't have anything beyond basic wound care." "Can you isolate him?" I said. It was the wrong word, and I knew it the second it left my mouth. Isolate. I'd spent my career isolating contaminants, containing vectors, quarantining compromised sections of pipe. I'd applied the same vocabulary to a human being standing 3 feet from me. Pete stiffened. "Isolate me where? I'm not an animal." Darnell stepped between us. "Pete, nobody's calling you an animal. But we've got 100 people in there, including kids, and nobody knows what happens next with a bite. We've got a chemical storage shed that's heated, has a light, and has a door you can open from the inside. You sit in there, we bring you water and food, and if nothing happens by morning, you walk right in. Deal? Pete looked at the shed, then at Darnell, then at me. Whatever he saw in my face was not what he saw in Darnell's. Fine, he said, but the door stays unlocked. It doesn't lock from the outside anyway, Darnell said, which was true and the perfect thing to say. We brought Pete a sleeping bag from someone's donation pile, 2 bottles of water, a granola bar, and the first aid kit. Megan cleaned the bite with bottled water and antibiotic ointment and wrapped it in gauze. Pete sat on a pallet of sodium hypochlorite drums and ate the granola bar. The shed smelled violently of chlorine. Kind of fitting, he said, looking at the chemical labels. Disinfected. At 7 a.m., he was alive. At 10 a.m., he was alive. At noon, he walked out of the shed under his own power, unwrapped the gauze, showed Darnell the wound swollen, purple, warm, infected in the ordinary bacterial sense, but not the other way. Pete Garza was bitten and did not turn. He also did not forgive me for the word isolate. He joined Ray's population without speaking to me again. And when I saw him helping carry water jugs to the families with children, he moved his route so it never passed the control room. I had been right to separate him. I'd been wrong in every other way that mattered. On day 3, I did something I'd resisted since the shutdown. I went into the pipe network. Not physically, not yet. I went into it with data. I pulled up the hydraulic model on the control room computer and began running contamination migration simulations using our calibrated network model. The model was designed for planning purposes, main replacements, pressure zone analysis, fire flow calculations. I'd never used it to simulate backflow contamination at a system-wide scale. No one had. The scenario didn't exist in the training manuals. What the model showed me was worse than my napkin math. Without pressure, cross-contamination from sewer proximity was not the only intrusion pathway. Every domestic service connection in the city was a potential backflow source. Hot water heaters with failed check valves, garden hose connections submerged in pools and buckets, boiler systems in commercial buildings, medical facility equipment with backflow preventers that hadn't been tested in years, and the one that stopped my breathing funeral homes. Embalming fluid, formaldehyde, methanol, glutaraldehyde, and whatever else was draining from bodies that might or might not reanimate on the table. All of it connected to the potable water system through service lines that relied on positive pressure to prevent reverse flow. The model showed contamination fronts advancing through the distribution network like dye in a capillary tube. Slow, silent, invisible. The first 3 days, the residual chlorine would suppress bacterial growth in the mains. By day 5, residual levels would drop below effective disinfection thresholds in the smallest diameter pipes, the service laterals, and dead-end branches that served residential neighborhoods. By day 8, the trunk mains would follow. By day 11, there would be no functional difference between the water in Chattanooga's distribution pipes and the water in the Tennessee River, except that people would drink from their taps without boiling, because taps meant safe. Taps had always meant safe. I printed the model output, 16 pages of hydraulic profiles, chlorine decay curves, and contamination probability maps. I took them to Ray. He read the first 2 pages, then looked at me. I don't understand any of this. The water in the pipes will be poisonous by next week. Not just non-potable, actively dangerous. Anyone in the city who's still drinking from a tap. And they will be, Ray, because we only reached a few hundred people, will get sick. The vulnerable ones will die. Not from the infected, from the water. Can you fix it? I can flush and disinfect the system with a full crew, power, and 3 weeks. I have none of those. Then, what are these maps for? They show which neighborhoods contaminate first. The high elevation zones, the dead-end mains, the areas farthest from the clear well, they go bad first. Brainerd, East Ridge, the whole south side. That's where most of the people are. I know. He sat with that for a long time. Then, so your shutdown saved the people who are here and condemned the people who aren't. My shutdown gave everyone the same information. The water is off. Don't trust it. The people who came here received that information. The people who didn't get your 11 notices out of 180,000. We stared at each other across the conference table. Gina was asleep on the cot behind him, her belly enormous under a donated blanket. The 3 kids were in the hallway playing a card game Ray had taught them, using a deck missing the 7 of clubs and both jokers. We need to go back out, Ray said. To do what? Drain the pipes. You said you opened blow-off valves near the plant. What about the rest of the city? I hadn't considered it because I'd been thinking like a plant manager. The system was my responsibility at the production end. The distribution network was the city's responsibility. But the city was gone. There was no public works crew. There was no utility department. There was me. If I open the blow-off valves in each pressure zone, the mains will drain by gravity over 24 to 48 hours. Empty pipe can't poison anyone. But there are 46 blow-off valve locations in the system, and they're spread across the entire service area. How many people would that take? 1 person per valve, if they know what they're doing. The valves are in manholes. You need a valve key, which is essentially a long-handled wrench. We have 4 at the plant. So, 4 teams. 4 teams driving through a city full of the dead to open manholes and turn valves. Some of those locations are in neighborhoods I wouldn't walk through before all this. Ray tapped the map. Show me which ones matter most. The ones that drain the areas where people are still living. I circled 14 locations. The ones that controlled drainage for the densest residential zones. 14 manholes. 4 valve keys. 3.5 days before the first laterals went toxic. We need volunteers, I said. I'll get them. You teach them how to use the wrench. I taught 4 teams of 3 in the parking lot that afternoon, using the blow-off valve nearest the plant as a training prop. The valve is a 6-inch gate valve in a concrete manhole, 3 feet below grade, operated by a T-handle key that you lower in and turn counterclockwise. It is not complicated. It is physical. The manhole cover alone weighs 80 pounds. The teams were assembled by Ray from the plant's population, and each one tells you something about who volunteers in a crisis. Team 1 was Pete Garza, a roofer named Dale, and Clarice's 30-year-old grandson, Marcus, who'd arrived on day 2. I hadn't asked Pete, Ray had. Pete said yes without looking at me. Team 2 was Megan and 2 men from the apartment complexes, both former military. Team 3 was a married couple, the Nyins, both pharmacists, and a teenager named Aubrey, who was the only person in the plant who could drive a manual transmission besides me. Team 4 was Darnell, and 2 women I hadn't met yet. Rosa, a nursing assistant, and Kim, who'd been a mail carrier for 30 years and knew every street address in 3 zip codes from memory. Kim was the most valuable person in the building, and nobody had known it until Ray asked who knew the streets. I gave each team a printed map with their valve locations circled, the valve key, a radio handset from our plant system, and a 6-pack of bottled water from our dwindling supply. Open the valve fully counterclockwise. You'll hear the water start to move. Leave it open. Drive to the next location. Do not stop for anyone you cannot identify as living from 50 feet away. If a location is inaccessible blocked road, too many of them nearby, manhole covers stuck, skip it and move on. No valve is worth dying for. Megan raised her hand. What's the water going to look like when it comes out? Discolored, brown to black, depending on sediment and intrusion. It will smell, possibly like sewage. The blow-off discharges into the nearest storm drain, so it'll run into the street and the gutter. If people see water coming from a manhole and try to collect it, stop them if you safely can. That water is the problem. That water is what we're trying to remove. And if people ask why we're draining the system, tell them the truth. The pipes are contaminated. Empty is safer than full. Direct them here for clean water. They left at 6 a.m. on day 4. All 4 teams in vehicles we'd accumulated 2 that had arrived with refugees, the utility van, and my truck, which I gave to Darnell. I stood at the gate and watched them turn onto Highway 30 in different directions, toward different quadrants of a city I'd spent 11 years keeping alive through its pipes. Then I went back to the control room and sat with the radio and the hydraulic model and the clear well level gauge, which now read 13.8 million gallons. We'd distributed 400,000 gallons in 3 days to the people inside our fence. The math said we had weeks of supply. The math also said the population inside the fence was still growing. Ray came in with a count sheet. 147 as of this morning, 12 more overnight, including a family of 6 from Ultewa, who drove 20 miles on back roads because somebody's cousin told somebody's coworker about a water plant that was giving it away. How'd they get past the wrecks on 153? They drove through a Wendy's parking lot and across a baseball field. Their van has a cracked axle. They're not driving anywhere else. So they're permanent. Everyone here is permanent, Warren. Nobody's leaving. This is where the water is. The teams came back at different times over the following 2 days. Team 1, Pete's team, returned first, having opened all 4 of their assigned valves in a single 10-hour run. Pete drove. Marcus operated the valve keys. Dale stood watch with a tire iron. They reported that the Brainerd corridor was largely depopulated, houses dark, streets empty except for wanderers, a few holdouts visible through windows who would not open their doors. When they opened the first blow-off valve on 3rd Street, water erupted from the manhole, with enough force to push the cover off-center. It was black. It smelled of rotten eggs and something else. Something biological that Pete described as wrong in a way I can't name. They left the valve open and drove away with the windows up. Team 4, Darnell and the women, returned 18 hours later. They'd hit a problem at their second location, a manhole on Dodds Avenue buried under a car that had rolled off the road and settled over the cover. They spent 2 hours rigging a tow from Kim's knowledge of which nearby auto shop might have a floor jack accessible through a broken window. They got the car moved, opened the valve, and found the discharge was not just discolored, but viscous. Darnell collected a sample in a test jar from habit. He showed it to me. I held it up to the light. It was water in the same sense that blood is water, technically accurate and functionally meaningless. That's from the 12-inch main on Dodds, I said. It feeds the entire East Ridge pressure zone. 3,000 service connections. What's in it? I didn't run a full analysis. I didn't need to. I opened the jar and smelled it, sewage, iron, and the sweet chemical trace of decomposition that you learn once and never forget. Whatever had died in or near a connected drain in that pressure zone was now distributed through the main. Everything, I said. Megan's team returned on day 5. They'd completed 3 of 4 locations. The 4th, on North Chamberlain Avenue, was inaccessible. A crowd of the dead had collected around a church where a generator was still running, attracted by the sound. Megan estimated 30 to 40 packed against the building's walls and doors, pressing with that patient, inexhaustible pressure that didn't understand obstacles, only direction. She'd parked a block away, watched for 10 minutes, and driven back. Team 3, the Nguyen's and Aubrey, didn't come back. We waited through day 5 and into day 6. I raised them on the radio every hour. Static. Darnell drove their route on the morning of day 6, retracing the map I'd given them. He found their vehicle, a Subaru Outback, parked at their 3rd valve location on Jenkins Road. Doors open, engine off, keys in the ignition. The manhole cover was pulled aside. The valve key was still in the hole, fully extended, as if the operator had been turning it and stepped away. No blood, no bodies, no sign of struggle. They had simply stopped being there. Darnell brought the valve key back. I hung it on the rack in the mechanical gallery with the other 3. 4 keys, 14 attempted locations, 11 confirmed open. 11 blow-off valves draining contaminated water from the distribution system into storm drains, gutters, and the streets. 3 valves still closed. 3 sections of the network still full. And the Nguyen's and Aubrey were gone into the silence that was replacing everything. I added their names to the list I'd started on the inside cover of my plant operations manual. Not a memorial, an inventory of debts. Warren Kessler took the water away, and these people went into the empty to make that matter. On day 7, the generator fuel gauge read 1/4. I'd been monitoring the consumption rate since day 1, but monitoring a decline is not the same as feeling it. 1/4 meant roughly 36 hours of continuous operation. After that, the pumps that circulated water through the clear well to prevent stratification would stop. The lights in the building would go dark. The control room computers that let me model what was happening in the network would die. And the population now, 203 people, including 9 children and 1 woman who was going to deliver a baby any day, would be sitting in a dark concrete building on top of water they couldn't access, without the sample line pump that ran on electricity. I gathered Darnell, Megan, and Ray in the control room and told them, "We need to gravity feed from the clear well before the power dies," I said. "The clear well floor is 18 feet below grade. The sample line is at the 12-foot level. If I open the access hatch on top and lower a siphon hose, we can draw from the tank directly, but the flow rate will be poor and we'll lose the sealed integrity of the clear well." "Meaning what?" Ray asked. "Meaning the clear well stays clean only because it's sealed. Once I open the hatch, airborne contaminants, debris, insects, anything in the atmosphere has access to the water. It won't go bad overnight, but it's no longer a controlled system. It's a very big bucket." "How long does it stay drinkable?" "With the residual chlorine still active, weeks. As the chlorine decays, and it will decay faster once exposed to air and sunlight, maybe a month. After that, it's surface water in a tank. So we have a month. We have a month of water. We don't have a month of food, medical supplies, sanitation capacity, or security. We have a month of one thing." Ray looked out the window at the people below. The parking lot had become a small settlement tarps stretched between vehicles, cooking fires in a ring of cinder blocks someone had built, a clothesline strung between the chemical shed and the fence. It looked like a refugee camp. It was a refugee camp. "Warren," he said, These people aren't going to leave. You know that. I know. Even if you told them the water runs out in a month, even if you told them the building goes dark tomorrow, they'd stay because out there is worse. I know, Ray. So what happens when the water's gone? I'd run that calculation too, lying awake on the control room floor while 203 people breathed in the building around me. The Tennessee River was 6 miles downstream. It was a permanent, renewable water source, billions of gallons flowing past the city every day. Untreated, it carried giardia, cryptosporidium, agricultural runoff, and now whatever the outbreak it introduced to the watershed. But it could be made safe with the one thing we had in industrial quantity: sodium hypochlorite. Bleach. The plant's bulk tank still held 11,000 gallons, enough to disinfect small batches of river water for years if you knew the dose rate. The problem was transport. 6 miles each way through occupied territory, carrying water by hand or vehicle repeatedly, indefinitely. It was not a plan. It was a sentence. We moved the operation, I said. Ray looked at me sharply. Move it where? To the river. We find a point on the bank with vehicle access, a defensible perimeter, and proximity to the intake structure. We take the hypochlorite, the dosing equipment, the test kits, and as many containers as we can carry. We set up a treatment station at the source instead of trying to bring the source here. You're talking about 200 people relocating. I'm talking about 200 people walking 6 miles to the only water supply that doesn't run out. Through a city full of the dead. On a route I know by heart, because every foot of it runs along a water main I've inspected annually for 11 years. I know which roads are wide enough for vehicles. I know which intersections have sight lines. I know where the terrain funnels and where it opens up. The infrastructure doesn't care about the dead. The infrastructure is still there. Darnell said, when? Day 9. We use tomorrow to prep. Siphon what we can carry from the Clearwell into every container in this building. Load the hypochlorite drums on the van. Strip the lab of every piece of test equipment that runs on batteries. Leave at dawn. And the plant? I looked around the control room. The SCADA monitors, the pump controls, the chemical feed panels, the logbooks going back 20 years, the plaques on the wall. 2019 Area-Wide Optimization Award. Best Tasting Water, Tennessee Section AWWA. My name was on 2 of them. The plant is a building. The water is what matters. We prepped through day 8 with the efficiency of people who understand a deadline. Megan organized container collection. Every jug, bottle, cooler, bucket, pot, and bag in the plant was filled from the siphon line and sealed. Darnell inventoried the hypochlorite supply and calculated transport weight. 11,000 gallons of liquid chemical weighing roughly 92,000 pounds. We couldn't move it all. We took what the van could carry 4 55-gallon drums, approximately 1,800 pounds. Enough to treat small batches of river water for months. Ray handled the people. This was the hardest part, and he did it the way he did everything, by walking up to each person individually and telling them the truth at a volume meant only for them. I overheard him with Clarice. Ma'am, the water here runs out. We're moving to the river where it doesn't. Can you walk 6 miles? I walked 8 miles yesterday looking for cat food. Did you find any? I found a dead Petco with a broken window and all the dog food gone, but the cat food still on the shelf. Nobody takes the cat food. It's a metaphor for something. Yes, ma'am, it probably is. The route I'd planned followed the trunk main corridor. Shallowford Road to Brainerd, Brainerd to the old industrial spur, the spur to the river access road that led to our raw water intake structure, The intake was a concrete box on the bank with a screened opening, a wet well, and a pump station that wouldn't function without power. But the wet well could be accessed manually. You could lower a bucket. And the structure was fenced, gated, and built to withstand river flooding, which meant it was the most defensible position on the bank. At 4 a.m. on day 9, Gina went into labor. Ray woke me with a hand on my shoulder. "Conference room, now." Gina was on the cot, gripping the frame, breathing in a pattern I recognized from nowhere in my professional experience. Rosa, the nursing assistant from Team 4, was with her. Calm, talking in a low, continuous stream of Spanish and English that seemed to be directed at the baby rather than the mother. Megan stood in the doorway, looking at me. "We can't move her," Megan said. "We have to move everyone. The fuel runs out in 12 hours. "Warren, she is in active labor. She cannot walk 6 miles. Then she stays. With Rosa, with enough water for a week. We come back for her. You're going to leave a woman in labor in an empty building. I'm going to leave a woman in labor in a concrete structure with clean water, a medical attendant, and a locked gate. Or I'm going to delay 202 people's access to the only renewable water source in the area because one person can't walk." Ray was standing behind me. I felt him there before he spoke. "Both things are true, Warren. You're right about the math and wrong about what it costs to be right. So, what do you recommend?" "We split. The main group walks to the river. You lead them because you know the route. I stay here with Gina, Rosa, Pete, and anyone else who can't make the walk. We hold the plant until you send a vehicle back." "Pete volunteered to stay?" "Pete volunteered before I asked." Of course he did. Pete Garza, whom I'd called a contaminant to his face without using the word, who hadn't spoken to me in 6 days, volunteered to stay behind in a building running out of power to protect a woman he'd known for less than a week. The man I'd isolated was the one choosing not to leave. I looked at Ray. He looked back at me with an expression I'd learned to translate only later. Not judgment, not forgiveness, but the simple acknowledgement that some people save lives with math and some save lives with presence. And the world requires both and forgives neither. We split at dawn. 189 people walked out of the Ocoee River Water Treatment Facility behind me, carrying water in every conceivable vessel, following a route drawn on photocopied maps along a buried pipe they couldn't see. 14 people stayed behind with Ray. I didn't look back at the building. If I had, I'd have seen Pete Garza standing on the roof where Darnell used to keep watch, holding a fire extinguisher like a weapon, scanning the access road for movement. But I didn't look. I was already calculating the walk. 6.2 miles at 2 miles per hour with children and elderly. 3 hours and 10 minutes if nothing went wrong. Nothing was going to go right. The walk took 7 hours. The first mile was clear. The Highway 30 corridor was sparse, open sight line, and the morning air was cold enough that the wanderers were sluggish in the fields and ditches. We moved in a column that stretched 200 yards. No formation, no discipline, just forward motion along the road shoulder with the fastest walkers at the front and the slowest at the rear. I was at the front. Megan was at the rear. Darnell drove the van at walking pace alongside the column with the hypochlorite drums and the bulk containers. At the Shallowford Road intersection, we hit the first cluster. 8 of them in the gas station parking lot where I'd posted my first notice 6 days ago. The paper was still taped to the window. The gas station man and his shotgun were gone. The 8 were standing in a loose constellation around the pumps, motionless. as if waiting for a transaction that would never complete. One of them turned when the column appeared, then another. Then the whole group oriented toward us, with that slow hydraulic synchronization that makes your blood go cold. Because it isn't coordination, it's tropism. Stimulus, response. No thought in the middle. I raised my hand and the front of the column stopped. The back didn't, compressing like an accordion. People bumped, stumbled, whispered. Stay on the far shoulder, don't run. Walking pace. We walked past them at 40 feet. They followed for about 200 yards, then stopped. Their attention wasn't persistent. It decayed with distance, like signal strength. The second mile was residential. Houses close to the road, fences, dogs, some alive, some not. The living ones running in packs that watched us with more tactical intelligence than anything dead. A German shepherd paced our column for half a mile, never barking, matching our speed exactly, evaluating us the way a foreman evaluates a crew. It disappeared into a yard and didn't return. At mile 3, we lost the road. A jackknifed propane truck had blocked Brainerd Road entirely, and the surrounding terrain, a strip mall on one side, a drainage ditch on the other, funneled us through the parking lot of a Family Dollar. The store's front windows were smashed, and the interior was dark. I could see shapes inside. Moving, not shopping. Keep close, keep moving, don't look in. We passed the storefront at 15 feet. A hand pressed against the remaining glass from inside, palm flat, fingers splayed, like a child pressing against an aquarium wall. The glass held. We passed. Mile 4 crossed the old industrial spur, a decommissioned rail line that I knew ran parallel to a 24-inch transmission main because I'd walked the easement twice a year for inspection. The spur was elevated on a gravel bed, clear of vegetation, with sight lines in both directions. I moved the column onto it, and the pace improved. People relaxed slightly on the open ground. Someone near the middle started talking in a normal voice and didn't stop a woman narrating the walk to her daughter, describing what they saw, making it a story, making it survivable by making it a story. Mile 5, the column fragmented. An elderly man, not Clarice's vintage but close, mid-70s, wearing dress shoes that had blistered his heels raw, sat down on the rail bed and said he was done. His name was Harold. He said it clearly. I'm done. Go on. 3 people behind him stopped. A woman with a baby in a carrier stopped. A teenager carrying 2 jugs of water stopped. Within 30 seconds, a gap had opened in the column, and the rear third was no longer moving. Darnell pulled the van alongside. Harold, get in the van. There's no room in the van with those drums. There's a front seat. Give it to her. He pointed at the woman with the baby. I'll sit here. Harold, you will die here. I know where I'll die, young man. It's not your concern. Megan was there now, at the rear, and she didn't argue. She took Harold's elbow, pulled him to his feet with a strength that surprised both of them, and walked him to the van. She opened the passenger door, pushed the stack of maps off the seat, and sat Harold down without a word. He didn't resist. He just looked startled, as if he'd expected his refusal to be respected. Your dignity is not more important than your life, Megan said. She closed the door. We moved. The river appeared at mile 6 as sound before sight, the low, continuous presence of moving water that you feel in your chest before your ears fully register it. The column came around the last bend of the spur, and the tree line opened, and the Tennessee River was below us. Wide, gray-green, indifferent, flowing south the way it had for 10,000 years. People stopped walking and stared. A child asked if they could swim. The intake structure was 100 yards downstream, a concrete rectangle on the bank with a chain-link enclosure and a gravel access road. It looked like nothing. It looked like salvation. I unlocked the gate with the key I'd carried on my belt for 11 years. The same key, the same lock. Inside, the wet well cover was bolted. Darnell and I removed the bolts and lifted the steel plate. Below was the screened intake chamber river water, filtered through the coarse bar screen, sitting at river level in a concrete box. I lowered a bucket on a rope and brought it up full, brown, cold, smelling of earth and river and the upstream accumulation of everything a watershed carries. I held the bucket and looked at the 189 people standing on the bank behind me, and I measured out sodium hypochlorite from the drum with a graduated cylinder. 8 drops per gallon, the emergency disinfection rate, and added it to the bucket and waited 30 minutes and tested the residual with a strip from the lab kit. 0.5 parts per million free chlorine. Safe. I drank first, not because I was brave, because if I'd calculated wrong, I needed to be the one who paid. It tasted like river and chlorine and nothing else. I filled a second bucket, treated it, and handed it to the nearest person, Harold, who was sitting on the concrete apron of the intake structure in his ruined dress shoes, looking at the river. "Not bad," he said. We sent the van back for Ray's group on day 10. Pete drove. He brought them all: Ray, Rosa, Gina, and Gina's daughter, born on the conference room floor of the Ocoee River Water Treatment Facility at 2:17 p.m. on day 9. Delivered by a nursing assistant who spoke to the baby in 2 languages, and a parts counter clerk who held Gina's hand through every contraction because he was the only person in the room she trusted, because he was the one who had stayed. The baby's name is Elena. She was 6 pounds, 4 ounces, healthy, furious at the world she'd entered. Gina asked me to hold her when they arrived at the river. I said I didn't know how. "You hold her like water," Gina said, "like she'll spill." I held her. She weighed nothing. She weighed everything. The intake structure became the center. Over the following weeks, we built around it tarps first, then salvaged lumber, then a water distribution station using the graduated cylinders and a dosing chart. I wrote on a piece of plywood in permanent marker and nailed to the intake housing. The chart showed the correct amount of sodium hypochlorite per gallon, the minimum contact time, and the residual test procedure. Anyone could follow it. That was the point. The knowledge had to survive me. Ray organized shifts: water treatment, perimeter watch, food procurement, sanitation. Darnell trained 4 people to perform the dosing and testing: Pete, Marcus, Aubrey's friend Leah, and Harold, who turned out to have been a high school chemistry teacher before he retired and who understood chlorine chemistry better than most of my former staff. "You're putting a 76-year-old man in charge of water treatment," Megan said. "I'm putting a chemist in charge of chemistry. His age is irrelevant. His shoes are irrelevant. Get him boots." Megan had changed, or I was seeing her for the first time. The 24-year-old operator who'd sat on the floor feeling for the plant's heartbeat was now running the supply logistics for 203 people with a clipboard she'd laminated with packing tape and a pencil she sharpened with a knife. She didn't defer to me anymore. She didn't defer to anyone. She operated on the principle that every system needs a person who knows where things are, and she had decided to be that person. I spent the first week at the river running calculations that no one asked for. Chlorine consumption rate versus supply remaining. At current population and usage, the sodium hypochlorite would last 14 months. Population growth rate 6 to 12 new arrivals per week, driven by word of mouth, by people following the river. by the simple gravitational logic that water draws life, would reduce that to 9 months. After the hypochlorite ran out, we'd need alternative disinfection, boiling, solar UV, slow sand filtration. I began designing a slow sand filter on the back of the dosing chart, using the intake structure's concrete walls as the housing. None of these calculations changed what had happened. They only built forward from it. On day 16, I walked back to the plant alone. I told no one. I left at dawn and followed the spur line in reverse. Through the Family Dollar parking lot, empty now. The shapes inside gone or dispersed past the gas station, up Highway 30 to the access road. The gate was open. Pete had left it open when he'd driven out with Ray's group. The building was dark. The generator had run out of fuel on day 10 or 11, based on my estimates. The control room was cold, the SCADA screens black, the pump controls inert. I walked through the mechanical gallery, past the clear well access hatch we'd left open for the siphon, and stood over the tank. The water level had dropped 2 feet from our extraction. 12 million gallons remaining, sealed in concrete, still carrying residual chlorine that would slowly, inevitably, decay. In a month, it would be stale. In 3 months, it would be biologically active. In a year, it would be a pool of standing water in an abandoned building, indistinguishable from any flooded basement in the city. I closed the hatch. I bolted it. I don't know why. The plant was dead, and the water inside it was orphaned, and I was the only person alive who would mourn a clear well. But I closed it the way I'd been trained, hatch sealed, bolts torqued, gaskets seated, because the system deserved to be shut down properly, even if no one would ever start it again. I walked back to the river in 4 hours. When I arrived, Pete was at the dosing station, measuring hypochlorite with the graduated cylinder, checking the residual with a test strip, handing treated water to a woman I'd never seen before. He glanced at me as I passed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The water was flowing. The water was clean. The man I'd quarantined was the one keeping it safe. I manage the river now. That's the only way I can describe it. Not the plant. The plant is a monument to a system that assumed tomorrow would have electricity and personnel and chemical deliveries and institutional trust. The river assumes nothing. It flows. You treat what you take from it, 1 bucket at a time, with a precision that cannot be automated because there is no automation left. I still run the numbers. Chlorine remaining. Population served. Consumption rate. Projected depletion date. I write them on the plywood chart every Sunday, and people walk past them the way they used to walk past the water bill, aware it exists, trusting someone else to manage it. The pipes under Chattanooga are still there. 340 miles of them, full of whatever the darkness put in. Nobody drinks from a tap anymore. That knowledge, don't trust the pipes, may be the only thing I gave this city that mattered. Not the water at the river, not the dosing chart. The understanding that the thing you trusted most was the thing most capable of killing you, and that the only safe water is the water you can see being made safe right now. I knew the pipes would kill more people than the dead. I was right. Being right is the thing I carry. Not like a trophy, like a bucket heavy, full, impossible to set down, necessary to deliver. 1 gallon at a time. 1 strip, 1 count. 1 more day the water is clean.